Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations on making it this far and not being lured away by this beautiful sunny day in this beautiful part of Greece. I think we've already heard a lot about AI today, so we're going to have to spice it up and keep people interested. We're going to be talking about beyond AI and what is the next wave of technological transformation. And we have a group of wonderful speakers with us today that bring a very varied perspectives and viewpoints. First up, we have Alvin Wong Grayling. He is an author, a senior fellow at Stanford, and also a virtual reality society lecturer at MIT. Next, we have Vasilis Koutsoumbas, who is a digital policy and AI advisor for the Office of the Greek Prime Minister. Sten Christian Salouver, I hope I said that correctly.
That's absolutely perfect.
Oh, wow. Strategic advisor at the Talent Digital Summit, which is hosted by the Prime Minister of Estonia. Alex Kotsopoulos, who is a partner, North America Sustainability Advisory Leader at RSM in Toronto. And last but not least, Eleni Nikolaidis, Chief Corporate Development Officer at PeopleCert here in Greece. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So my first question is going to go to Vasilis, who represents our own government, in a sense. And I want to ask you, in this day and time, obviously things are moving really fast. You know, from one week to the next, developments are hard to keep track of, and I know that because I'm a journalist and it's my job to keep track of them. What do you think governments need to do to stay up to date with technology and AI? And do you feel like the Greek government is doing a good job at keeping up?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the forum for having us. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'll talk about three things. The one is the opportunity that comes with AI when it comes to being in government at this time and age. The challenges we're also facing when it comes to incorporating the technology, and the third one will be how policymakers, how government officials can leverage the first and tackle the second. So, on the opportunity side, which is, it's good to be in Greece and in Europe and talk more about AI opportunity than AI challenges, to be honest. On the opportunity side, I think it's the first time since the Industrial Revolution where governments have a unique opportunity to reimagine the state. If you go back to the 19th century, you had a very minimalistic state, right, which was covering basic property rights. You went to the 20th the state was expanding, welfare state and whatnot, and then you come to the 21st century state, a state that has expanded a lot, that needs to cover a lot of needs for its citizens, and costs keep rising. And public services, the quality of public services is definitely debatable. So AI offers this unique opportunity to go throughout that cycle, which is the political philosophy with which you govern, A, how that translates into data-driven policy, and the third one, which I would say sometimes is the most important one, is the government operating system, the government OS. So the basic structures, the basic bureaucratic structures, the foundations of the state apparatus. And there is where most of the challenges lie as well. So the state apparatus, governments as we know them today, especially within the European Union, they were made for a post-World War II, 1960s, 1970s world. In what sense? In the sense that everything, from processes to public procurement to whatnot, it's built for that era. And technology always, outpaced the way governments work. But right now, in this time and age, this is growing exponentially. So the biggest challenge, I think, and there are many, the biggest challenge, I think, is that if we don't find a way to upgrade the government operating system, the way that governments, within the basic foundations, the way they work, then we're going to fall behind. And the reason, and the way I think policymakers can do that is three things. The first one, we need more talent. We always talk about, needing more talent in the market and in the private sector and in startups and so on. I kid you not, we need more talent in government. I know most of the times the incentives are not there in terms of, money and whatnot, but we do need more tech-savvy people to be able to handle projects within government. The second one is being flexible when it comes to incorporating government frameworks and government infrastructure. What does that mean? Government by its nature is risk-averse. And that to a point makes sense. You're handling pretty sensitive data, pretty sensitive information. But at the same time, there's a correlation between how risk-averse a government is and how much it's not able to adopt technology. So we need to be taking a few more risks. And the last one, I think, is that you need to embed that within the civil service structure. We're running a lot of pilots and projects now with big companies, both from the US and Europe. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of excitement at first glance. You have the political will to push forward with the project. But if that doesn't get embedded within the basic government structure, when the government changes, it's just not going to continue. And on your question about Greece, I'm obviously biased, so I'll take a step back and say, over the past few years, I think that the country has made a huge leap. And the way I like to describe it when I go abroad is, we went through different phases. The first phase was the digitization phase, and we can compare it to the early stage of the internet, where you had your first web pages popping up, you had your gov.gr as a web page, a frictionless way to interact with the state. Then we went to the 2010s, which was the productization phase. We saw which applications, which services were being used more, and we created applications for that, from my Gov wallet to my health app and so on. And now the third stage is the AI layer, which is building on top of the other two. So I think we've done a pretty good job. I think our biggest challenge right now is, because we don't have the luxury to take a step back and say, oh, I'm going to restructure the system from day one and recreate and reestablish those institutions in order for them to harness technology. We need to be making it up as we go along.
Mm-hmm. I hope some people are inspired to maybe get a job with the Greek government and be tech savvy.
We're open. We're hiring.
I want to bring Stan in a little bit, because obviously what you say, Vasilis, is how do we update the operating system of the government and so on and so forth. But there's another part of AI which is very important, which is the benefits of AI, and that includes profits and so on. And one part of that is, do you have a good health app? But overall, would you say that governments in Europe are doing enough to distribute the benefits of AI widely across society?
Do you want a real answer or a polite answer?
I'll take real.
Okay, let's take hands. How many of you in the hall have an AI strategy and implementation plan in place? So which of you have in your organizations, in your company, a tactical plan with 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 4 month cadence of implementing AI or any exponential technology in your company or organization? Who says yes? A few. So I try to be very polite. This is really a sprint rather than a marathon. If you look at the broader perspective, the demands of the users and the escalation of technology are moving at such an unprecedented speed where we are almost mitigating risks and all of those elements in real time or basically in hindsight. If a technology cycle in a regular business used to be 2 years, then 1 year, then what we see right now that the technology cycle could be up to 2 weeks. Understanding how new capable technologies, and these are not only AI, but other technologies, whether they are in biotech, cybersecurity, or anything else. I'm sure mythos has been a very mythical word spoken here at the forum around the Oracle, but we just have to see how fast these effects were rippling. Now, what that means is the governments and actually corporations need to implement almost a real-time strategic and tactical approach in providing these benefits. At the same time, consumers and citizens are expecting these benefits from governments, otherwise they will go to private services, and healthcare, for example, is a very good example, where we see that a lot of healthcare traffic is actually going to AI platforms exactly for the reason because the regular services are unable to provide that. So how we are operating in that environment where we need to upskill, provide an infrastructure, provide a secure and operational capacity in order to deploy that. Estonia, for example, has embarked on a very ambitious course, and I would call this course a tactical action plan rather than strategy. The number one component is upskilling future workforces, understanding that in Estonia, broadly 2/3 of teenagers are using LLMs on a daily basis. In Europe, in average, it's 37%. If you put that in another way, what would education look like if teachers are meaningless? That's why our president a year ago, Mr. Karis, President Karis, who was also speaking at the opening here, launched the TI initiative, which has already enabled AI solution for every single gymnasium student and teacher in Estonia. That project was announced a year ago. In September, we deployed. Teachers and students are on board. So 6-month cycle. Number two, our Prime Minister recently announced an Eesti or Estonia.ai initiative in order to really have that benefit for the SMEs. I'm sure that in Greece also, besides your great big tech, most of the economic fabric is SMEs. The SMEs are unable to access AI or any technologies because of cost, because of knowledge, as well as implementation curves. The plan is very simple. Upskill 100,000 SMEs within the next 9 years, have the GDP increased by 25%, and basically have 1 million upskilling programs completed within a decade. The program was announced on April 8th. The first workshops have started. Actually, while I was traveling here, I saw that next week there are next workshops. I was thinking to call my father to go and take some of these because he's exactly struggling on that type of capacity. And the third layer, obviously, is totally reimagining what a digital service would mean between states and governments. And I think in many ways, the government is a trusted service provider alongside many other options. And our Digital State 2035 plan, which came out of the Ministry of Justice and Digital Affairs, foresees that by 2035, we have full agentic services, cross-linked with all databases available. Number two, a future infrastructure and connectivity layer. And I'm sure Alvin can talk about what that layer means. And that would probably mean micro models, local compute, secure services, hyperconnectivity, and etc. And last but not least, providing that cybersecurity layer. So if I try to sum all of this up, the critical question here is not regulative. We should not regulate because regulation leads our customers, our citizens, and our stakeholders to places where they are not necessarily desirable. It needs a tactical, real-time, private sector, partnership-oriented approach. And then the benefits can actually come within a very tangible time frame.
I mean, it's interesting you bring up also trust and being a trusted service provider. And I wonder, and maybe Alex, you want to pick up on this, do you think there is enough trust in the providers of AI? And what is the role of governing these technologies, including and especially perhaps big tech, which are providing some of the most advanced capabilities?
So thank you for the question. Let me start by saying governments and regulators cannot, and dare I say, should not do it all. I think it's very important that a much more distributed model around building trust, ensuring that AI is used on a responsible, ethical basis is in fact critical, and I think will best ensure that economic, societal, environmental, and other benefits will best be distributed throughout as well. I think and just to pick up on this concept of trust, an interesting thing has sort of emerged recently where, in my capacity as a sustainability consultant, I work a lot with companies to support their, sustainability, ESG strategies, reporting, etc. But sustainability reports have emerged recently as the platform where companies are increasingly telling their AI story. They're talking about of course, the financial benefits, productivity benefits, but they're also talking a lot about responsible AI. They're talking a lot about responsible AI. They're talking a lot about how they're talking about governance and KPIs and even environmental impact as well. And this is where I think kind of the rubber meets the road. I think if companies...
Alex, I'm not sure if it's on. Is it on?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Is it on?
Can you hear him?
Can you guys hear me?
Okay.
Okay. But I think if governments want, or let me just say this, I think if companies want to, build trust, it really starts with them, right? They have to implement AI on a responsible basis. They have to disclose what they're doing. They need to be transparent about what they're doing. Of course, government has a role as well to play. But really, I think companies have to understand that it's in their best interest, in their long-term best interest, to make sure that they have the proper controls, the proper governance, and I think that's going to be absolutely critical. And if I can just piggyback on a few things that were said earlier, this AI story, I really think that we are in chapter 1 of maybe not even chapter 1, maybe like the flap of the book, right? Of what is going to be a fascinating, disruptive, exciting, thrilling, and hopefully beneficial story that is yet to be written. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that, I think it's going to be vital that we that we take these first steps in a proper way. And I think that's where I think a company's sustainability strategy needs to evolve to account for some of these risks. And I think, and we're starting to see that actually. There's a surprising number of companies that are starting to talk about, AI from a societal megatrend perspective and thinking quite critically about how it's impacting their stakeholders and the environment. And hopefully we can continue the progress in that regard.
So far we've heard quite a positive view of AI, but I do think some healthy skepticism, as you were bringing in, Alex, is useful. And I personally, I'm quite scared that AI will take my job. Alvin, maybe as an author and academic, you can talk to us a little bit about that future. Will AI take our jobs? And is it coming?
Well, I think this is actually one of the more important questions that we should be asking. In fact, if I went to a lot of the sessions this week, and a lot of it was about technology, and then a lot of it was about national security, but not enough was really about this question of how does the society transition from the world that we are in today to the world that we are headed in if we successfully move into a post-AGI world. I think Europe's actually very lucky to have folks like Vasilis and Sten, who are technical, young, energetic people in government who is going to help play a role in this. And I think this is an area where actually the government does and should and will have to play a bigger role, right? Because if you leave it to purely business and market and capitalistic forces, we will have a relatively scary environment of what Eliza is talking about, because the forces of market says that you have to maximize profit. And when you maximize profit, you minimize costs is one of the fastest ways to do this. In fact, last week I just came out with a new report at Stanford that's showing that 60% of companies are either going to lay off people or not hire because of productivity gains from AI. And that's going to be a big part of the market. And for regions like US, Europe, East Asia, somewhere around 60 to 65% of the population are white-collar workers. And white-collar workers are the most exposed to AI displacement. So, it's very important for places like here to think about how do you fairly distribute the gains from this technology. How do you maintain smooth transition so that people have a soft landing? And also, how do you provide meaning for people once they move off from their existing jobs? Because so many people today identify their work as who they are. And I think longer term, this is going to be a significant issue as more and more people move from existing work to maybe a different sector, because we went from farming to mechanical to office work. Now I think the only places where machines will not be superior to humans are in places that are more human-to-human type services, where having face-to-face, having the trust that Alex is talking about becomes more valuable. And I think those are type of things today that are either underpaid or they are under-respected in the society. And we need to allow people to realize that service to community, service to your society is actually just as valuable as being a banker or a lawyer or being a a programmer, right? Where those used to be kind of put up as the high status symbol activities, whereas I think going forward, as more and more automation comes and takes over, whether you're talking about robots taking over manufacturing jobs or you're talking about AI taking over white-collar work, we need to allow service workers, people who are teachers, nurses, doctors, elderly care, and even parents should be given a higher status in society because they are actually the ones that will be caring for the next generation. They're going to be caring for the sick and the elderly. And those things actually allow us to have a stable society. So we need to think about how do we incentivize and how do we celebrate service versus celebrating just wealth, right? And which is the issue that we have today.
Isn't there an argument that that may also happen somewhat automatically?
If we had 30, 50, 80 years as what it took the prior industrial revolutions to play out, the economy might transition. And even in the first and second industrial revolutions, there was 30 or 40 years where the prior skilled workers actually had no jobs or no pay increases for decades, right? So natural forces actually will force us into a very unequal world, a world where you have ultra-rich and have-nots, which ultimately creates conflict, which ultimately creates revolution, which ultimately creates instability in the world. And I don't think any of us want to see that happen. So there needs to be, the government does need to step in and either try to create more equity in terms of redistribution or slow down things a little bit so that the natural forces of the market can catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things are moving fast, that's for sure. Eleni, I want to ask you on a very practical level, what can the people in this room do to build the resilient skills that they need for tomorrow so that they don't get replaced by AI?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think it's very important to define what do we mean by skills, because we're talking about many different things, I believe. My view, representing an organization that has been in the worlds of skills for more than 25 years, is that indeed we're talking about the technical skills. And in the way that we're describing technical skills today, indeed, there are many changes. And the number one thing that people should always remember is that we need to learn fast and unlearn fast. And at the focus of whatever we do should be upskilling, reskilling all the time. Because I'm sure if anyone in this room thinks about the changes that they have been through since they were born, and even in the last 10 years of their career, they will realize that their technical skills, they have changed massively. Even if you think about the way that we're communicating today, this has nothing to do with how we were communicating 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. Now, still, we are all humans, and I'm sure that if you're part of a large team, and even better, if you're managing a large group of people, what you'll find as maybe one of the most challenging things is actually managing people. Mm-hmm. Okay, because we are at the center of everything, and in order to be irreplaceable, we're still looking for the same soft skills that my parents, and I'm sure your parents, they have taught you about: communicate well, think, have your own critical thinking, so do not consume whatever is served to you, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I may,
yes,
just very
please.
quickly, I think this is a really important point, and I would just say as well, I think the innovation that, in some sense, we have to become more human, right? And in the context of all this disruptive technological change and everything, I think maybe that's the opportunity for us, right? Is to lean into our humanity, right? To build those relationships, to build that connection with our clients, with society, etc. And I think maybe that's a bit of the sort of transition and innovation that has to occur to ensure that the economic societal benefits of AI are indeed distributed widely.
Yes, Tan, go on.
I'd like to throw a very important variable, which comes also to the skills. And one of the most critical skills, again, will be the ability to interact seamlessly with technology. And this seems a very small feat, but if we would extrapolate ourselves on this stage about 10 years later, then a lot of signs are pointing towards what I would call a dual economic and societal world. One of this, what I would call right now a meta or a synthetic world or a synthetic economy, which is purely operating on agentic basis. It will serve a lot of functions, both in government and society, which we can automatically delegate parts of our life. Imagine 1 million production assistants working on your inbox, real time, making decisions on behalf of you, even not asking but predicting your input. And by the way, that's not a science fiction scenario. That's pretty much that happens, for example, in my inbox on a daily basis or in my computer. I just recently ran a small study, and as you can imagine, I use technology quite a bit. And I was saving in 1 month by approximately around 300 hours of time. At the same time, what that also means is that from a perspective of society, leadership, and personality, you would need to be able to move between delegation of your self-identity and your roles and your agency in both as a citizen, as an employer, and as a person, and so forth, to someone that goes and operates on behalf of you. And for example, this is not a very clear decision that has been discussed on upskilling, on interpersonal relationships, on tech facilitation, or anywhere else at large. And these demands, or what I would call a kind of an ability to be able to interact seamlessly with synthetic compute, is definitely going to be a major skill set. And some people adapt more faster, some adapt slower, but that would also give a competitive edge in an organization and largely in a society that it's supposed to be.
Vasilis, you wanted to jump in?
I mean, sorry for hijacking your questions. I love what you said about labor displacement, which is not talked about enough. Two thoughts: impact of AI on labor and the environment and the constraints that creates. I think what you said is true. Like, governments have to play a big role, but I think it'll be the first time since I can remember that governments have to kind of come up with, reskilling and upskilling programs pertaining to white-collar employees. Yeah. Right? And my fear, my anxiety there is that governments themselves, I'm not talking about Greece, but in general, they don't have the capacity to do so. Right? The way that technology is outpacing the way we're creating those programs there's a gap there. And there's a whole discussion after that about universal basic income as to how do you offset this huge gap that's going to be created between the people who lose their jobs and the state potentially providing that universal basic income. And I love what you said, because I think that doesn't take into account the intrinsic value and that comes through working and being productive and being creative. Yes. Right? And when you're hearing tech executives say that, oh, we're going to cover everything with a UBI. You're going to lose your job, but the government or an institution will provide a stimulus check and you're fine. It misses the point, and it just insinuates that the only reason why a person would be contributing themselves to society is just for financial benefit. Of course, and it's important to pay your bills at the end of the month and feed your children, but it's not just that. There's a deeper intrinsic value there. And the second point I want to make is this has a huge environmental and human cost. How are these models and these applications being created through all of us, through our talent, right, which has constraints, through our land, through our energy, through our water. So I think the biggest constraint that I potentially see when it comes to AI in the next few years is hitting the bottleneck as to how much of the aforementioned elements we can use. And this is our role as policymakers and as a government to explain to people why reaching AGI is important. What is even AGI? What does it mean for you on a daily basis? Not just from an ROI on productivity, but how does it improve your life specifically? Why you should care about this? What is the AI dividend that's going to spread around?
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear Vasilis say this, because when I go to DC and talk about these topics, I either get denial that, no, we'll always have more jobs, don't worry about it, or we need to stop AI, nobody should be using AI. And the reality is in between. And we need to recognize this technology has immense capabilities that can bring new discovery that can make our lives better. We need to recognize also that it could be used by bad actors for harm. We need to recognize that it could also be used as a crutch for young people, where they will be so reliant on it, they lose agency, right? We also need to worry about when people don't have work or have a transition period that's very long, how do they maintain meaning? And these are the kind of things that I'm so glad to hear you're thinking about because very few other governments in the world are doing that. And I think this actually allows places like Greece to take a lead and show people what should be done. In fact, I think one of the things I hear a lot, especially this week, is people say, oh, Europe is so behind, China and US have all the lead in technology. I have to give you some good news. The good news is AI today, most advanced AI today are essentially open source, right? So anybody in the world can download an open source model, either put it onto your home computer, your servers in your country, and then have access to something that other people spend tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars to build. So really, the success of a country is not who invents the technology. The success of a country and a market is who can deploy it broadly, safely, and in a stable way to your economy, and to see the benefits of that come into fruition and to help the lives of the people. And I think, with leaders like this, you guys have a very good chance to do that.
I want to ask a question about responsibility. Stan, you mentioned upskilling in Estonia. I think it's great that you do that. But can governments truly have the foresight and also the money to upskill like a massive, okay, sure, go ahead, a massive amount of people? And then I would like to hear from Eleni and Alex, if you think that you also, as companies, as you integrate more AI in your work, you also have a responsibility to your employees to retrain them. But Stan, go ahead, you wanted to...
Short answer, yes. And I'd like to follow up what you both said. First of all, this is a shared responsibility. And I think it's an extraordinary moment to reimagine what the relationship between a government and its citizens are. Estonia's policy through our digital state for years has been no backdoors, citizen-centric, all levels. And our 2035 roadmap specifically also states that we want to be agentically powered, freedom-focused, but also citizen-centric. And that also means, as Alvin mentioned, open source models, local uniqueness, being close to your citizens, providing both regulatory and means to understand how certain inputs lead to certain type of outputs, and actually putting the human in the centric seat. And that, I would say, follows along as we have organic food. I'm sure that we will have organic AI, if I would project this, where the responsibility component is important or even more critical than the technological capacity.
And yeah, responsibility, Eleni or Alex?
Yes. So it always depends on what each company wants to achieve. So for us as an organization that we're super ambitious, and for the last 10 years we have been growing with, let's say, 34%. It's impossible if we are not fully focused and we're not investing 100% on skilling our own people. And in comparison to other organizations, our motto is we go either all in or we go home. And I can guarantee to you, because we're spending millions on this, biggest investment on our side is on our people and actually letting them have the time in order to experiment with AI. Now, equally what we're seeing is if you as a person do not want to get trained, no one is going to force you. So responsibility, yes, we're doing everything that we can in order to give to our people the opportunity to be competitive in this new era. But we fully understand, and actually recently I was reading a study saying that Gen Z is actually fighting this trend. Because on our side, we're saying, listen, if you're not good with AI, then you are at risk. It's not the other way around. But still, globally, Gen Z, it looks like it fights this trend itself.
Very interesting.
And I'll just add, like at RSM, we are investing over $1 billion in AI. And a lot of that money is being spent on training, upskilling our people. And I think the best way, and I think, I think that's an important part of how we're going to grow as an organization. We're also building out audit platforms that are AI enabled and the like. And and essentially, we see our role as being enablers, orchestrators of AI, and helping our clients and companies and other organizations better integrate AI on a responsible basis, of course, but on a basis that generates value for their for their respective organizations.
Elisa, can I add the point?
Yes.
Being responsible, though, is not just about training people. 50% of employees today, they say that by accident we have added confidential data into one LLM without knowing it. So responsibility, yes, is about training people what they should do, but also what they should not do. And this goes back to the governance question that you started with.
Yes, I certainly, as a reporter, I'm very careful about what I put in a chatbot. One last question, because we only have 1 minute. I think to you, Alvin, but if someone else wants to take it up, do you think that governments really are thinking about this big change enough and are, putting their money or policy where their mouth is for this next wave of work?
I think it's hard to say governments in general because every country has different policies, and some places like here we actually have people who are thinking about it. But I think on a large part, most governments are not thinking to the depth that they need to, and unfortunately most of them just don't understand the technology because they're usually run by 60, 70, 80-year-olds who haven't touched the technology, and unfortunately it takes a lot of time for them to understand. So we need younger leaders who are tech savvy to come in and bring new leadership into this. And then we actually, I was just speaking at a high school in New York about a week and a half ago, and to 500 students, and I was telling them they are going to be the ones who inherit the world that we are creating for them. And they need to ask and demand a seat at the table to help influence the policies that are coming because they will be the ones living with it for the next decades. And we need people who are growing up in this generation who understands the technology, who understands how it's being used to be listened to. So, all of you with children, get your children's perspective on how they see this technology. How are their peers talking about it? What are they afraid of? How are they thinking about job and work and their value? And really also teach them one thing is don't let the AI, don't lose your agency to AI. It's so easy right now to ask AI for an answer to everything. But if you just change one order of how you use it, it completely changes the value of this technology. Is first you come up with your own answer, and then you go ask AI, what do you think about my answer? What did I think about? What did I miss? And when you ask that, just change the order of when you use AI. Its value to the person, its value in terms of education to that young person will increase dramatically.
All right. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, everyone.